The hospital room smelled of antiseptic and regret, a sterile prison where Ryan's life had fractured at 17. His father's fist, heavy with rage, had shattered more than his spine that night. It had broken his trust in the world. Now, 8 years later, that same man stood at Ryan's doorstep, begging for forgiveness and the money to save his own life. Ryan Wheeler, now 25, gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, his knuckles whitening as he stared at the man who had once been his hero. The living room of his small Boston apartment felt too small to contain the weight of their history. Outside, the autumn leaves swirled in the October wind, a reminder of the world moving on while Ryan's past clung to him like damp clothes. "I don't owe you anything," Ryan said, his voice steady but laced with a quiet fury. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked onto his father's weathered face. Paul Wheeler, once a towering figure with a voice that could shake walls, now looked diminished, graying hair, sunken cheeks, and eyes clouded with desperation. The man who had screamed slurs and swung a tire iron in a drunken rage was now a shadow, pleading for a lifeline. "I know I don't deserve it, Ryan," Paul said, his voice cracking, "but I'm dying. The cancer's eating me alive, and the treatment costs more than I'll ever have." He clutched a crumpled letter from a hospital, as if it were proof of his redemption. Ryan's mind flashed back to that night in their old house in Concord, Massachusetts. He was 17, barely out to his best friend, when Paul caught him kissing a boy from school in the backyard. The memory was vivid. The humid summer air, the fireflies blinking, and then the explosion of his father's voice. "You're no son of mine," Paul had roared, his face twisted with disgust. The tire iron came next, a blur of metal that caught Ryan's back as he tried to run. He woke up in the hospital, his legs useless, his mother sobbing, and his father gone, fled to avoid charges, leaving Ryan to rebuild alone. Now, Paul stood before him, not as a father but as a beggar. Ryan's chest tightened, a storm of emotions. Anger, grief, and something softer he refused to name, threatening to overwhelm him. He had spent years clawing his way to independence, earning a degree in graphic design, building a life with Ethan, his partner of 3 years. Ethan, with his easy laugh and unwavering support, was everything Paul had never been. Yet here was his father, dragging the past back into Ryan's carefully constructed present. "You left me to rot," Ryan said, his voice low but cutting. "Mom worked herself to death to pay for my surgeries. Where were you when I had to learn to live like this?" He gestured to the wheelchair, his constant companion since that night. Paul's shoulders slumped. "I was a coward, Ryan. I was wrong. I thought I could fix you, make you normal. I didn't know how to handle it." His voice broke, but Ryan felt no pity, only a cold, hollow ache. "Normal?" Ryan laughed bitterly. "You broke my spine because I loved someone. You don't get to walk in here and ask for my help like it's nothing." The room fell silent, save for the faint hum of the radiator. Ryan's thoughts drifted to Ethan, who was at work at the local bookstore. Ethan had been his anchor, the one who saw past the chair to the man Ryan had become, strong, creative, and fiercely independent. They had met at a community art event, where Ethan's warm smile and quick wit had drawn Ryan out of his shell. Their first date, a picnic by the Charles River, had been the first time Ryan felt truly seen since the accident. Now, they shared this apartment, their lives intertwined like the roots of an old oak. Paul shifted uncomfortably, his hands fidgeting. "I've got nowhere else to turn, son. The hospital won't treat me without payment up front. I need $50,000, or I'm done for." The word son stung like a slap. Ryan's jaw tightened. "Don't call me that. You lost that right 8 years ago." Paul's eyes glistened, but Ryan couldn't tell if it was genuine remorse or desperation. "I know I failed you," Paul said. "I've spent years running from what I did. I'm not asking for forgiveness, just a chance to live long enough to make things right." Ryan wanted to scream, to throw Paul out, to erase him from his life entirely. But something stopped him, a flicker of memory from before the violence, when Paul had taught him to ride a bike, cheering as Ryan wobbled down the driveway. That man was gone, buried under years of hate and absence, but the memory lingered, complicating Ryan's resolve. "I need time," Ryan said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Get out." Paul nodded, defeated, and shuffled toward the door. "I'm staying at the motel on Route 2. Please, Ryan. Think about it." As the door clicked shut, Ryan exhaled, his hands trembling. He wheeled to the window, staring out at the crimson and gold leaves blanketing the street. The weight of his father's plea pressed against him, threatening to crack the life he'd built. He didn't know Paul anything, not after what he'd done. But the idea of holding a man's life in his hands, even one who had destroyed so much of his own, was a burden Ryan wasn't sure he could carry. When Ethan came home that evening, Ryan was still by the window, lost in thought. Ethan dropped his bag and knelt beside him, his hand resting gently on Ryan's. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice soft but probing. Ryan met Ethan's blue eyes, the ones that always seemed to see straight through him. "My dad showed up," he said, the words heavy. "He's dying, and he wants my help." Ethan's face hardened, but his touch remained gentle. "The man who did this to you." He gestured to the wheelchair, his voice tight with protective anger. "What did you say?" "I told him to leave," Ryan said. "But I don't know, Ethan. He's desperate. Part of me wants to let him suffer, but another part," he trailed off, unable to articulate the tangle of emotions. Ethan squeezed his hand. "You don't have to decide anything tonight. Whatever you choose, I'm here." Ryan nodded, grateful for Ethan's steadiness. As they sat together, the sunset painting the room in warm hues, Ryan felt the first stirrings of a question he couldn't ignore. Could he find a way to heal without forgiving the man who had broken him? The next morning, Ryan woke to the soft patter of rain against the window. Ethan was already up, brewing coffee in their cramped kitchen, the scent of roasted beans mingling with the damp air. Ryan maneuvered his wheelchair to the table, his mind still churning from Paul's visit. The question of what to do about his father felt like a stone in his chest, heavy and unyielding. "You didn't sleep much," Ethan said, sliding a mug toward Ryan. It wasn't a question. Ethan always knew when Ryan's thoughts kept him up, his green eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "I kept thinking about him," Ryan admitted, wrapping his hands around the warm mug. "About what he did, and what he's asking now. It's like he's trying to rewrite history, make himself the victim." Ethan sat across from him, his expression a mix of concern and resolve. "You don't owe him anything, Ryan. Not after what he put you through. But I know you. If you don't at least think this through, it'll eat at you." Ryan nodded, staring into his coffee. Ethan was right. He couldn't just shove Paul's plea into a box and forget it. The man had destroyed his life, but the idea of letting him die without acting felt wrong, somehow. Not forgiveness, but something else, a need to prove he was better than the hate that had scarred him. "I'm going to see him," Ryan said suddenly, surprising himself. "At the motel. I need to know if he's telling the truth about the cancer, about everything." Ethan's brow furrowed, but he didn't argue. "Want me to come with you?" Ryan shook his head. "This is something I need to do alone." The drive to the motel on Route 2 was a blur of gray skies and slick roads. Ryan's adapted van, a hard-won purchase from years of freelance design work, hummed steadily as he navigated the familiar streets of Boston's outskirts. The motel was a rundown relic, its neon sign flickering weakly against the drizzle. Paul's room was on the first floor, the door chipped and faded. When Paul opened it, Ryan was struck again by how small his father looked. The man who had once loomed like a giant was now frail, his clothes hanging loosely on a frame ravaged by illness. "Ryan," Paul said, his voice a mix of surprise and relief. "You came." "I'm not here to save you," Ryan said bluntly, wheeling into the cramped room. The air smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener. "I need to know if you're lying. Show me the proof." Paul fumbled with a stack of papers on the bedside table, handing Ryan a folder with trembling hands. Inside were medical records, scans, and a letter from a Boston hospital confirming stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The prognosis was grim: 6 months without treatment, maybe a year with it. The cost: $50,000 for the first round, with more to follow. "It's real," Ryan said, his voice flat as he handed the folder back. "But why me? You've been gone 8 years. You must have someone else." Paul sat heavily on the bed, his hands clasped. "I don't. Your mom's gone. My brothers cut me off years ago. I burned every bridge, Ryan. You're all I've got left." The words landed like a punch. Ryan wanted to feel nothing, but the admission stirred something. Pity, maybe, or the ghost of a bond long buried. "You expect me to just forget what you did?" he asked, his voice rising. "You left me paralyzed. You left Mom to clean up your mess until it killed her." Paul's head bowed. I know. I was a monster. I was drunk, angry, scared. I thought I could beat the gay out of you, like it was some kind of disease. I was wrong, Ryan. I've lived with that every day since. Ryan's throat tightened. He wanted to believe the remorse, but the scars, physical and emotional, screamed louder. You don't get to just say sorry and make it okay, he said. I had to rebuild my life from nothing. I had to learn to live in this chair, to deal with people staring, to fight for every scrap of independence. And you were gone. Paul's eyes were wet, but he didn't look away. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't want to die knowing I never tried to make it right. Ryan wheeled back toward the door, his heart pounding. I need to think. Don't call me. I'll find you if I decide anything. Back at the apartment, Ethan was waiting, his presence a quiet comfort. Ryan recounted the visit, the medical records, the raw desperation in Paul's voice. I don't know what to do, Ryan admitted, his voice breaking. Part of me wants to let him rot, but another part don't know, Ethan. What does it say about me if I let him die? Ethan pulled his chair closer, his hand finding Ryan's. It says you're human, he said softly. You're allowed to feel conflicted. You're allowed to hate him and still want to do the right thing. Whatever you choose, it's about who you are, not who he is. That night, Ryan lay awake, Ethan's steady breathing beside him. The rain had stopped, leaving a quiet that felt too heavy. He thought of his mother, who had worked double shifts to cover his medical bills, her heart giving out when Ryan was 20. He thought of the years of physical therapy, the nights he'd cried alone, the slow climb to a life he was proud of. And now, Paul's plea, a chance to save a man who didn't deserve it, but whose life hung in Ryan's hands. By morning, Ryan had made a decision, not a final one, but a step. He would meet Paul again, but not alone. He needed Ethan there, not just for support, but to remind him of the life he'd built despite his father's cruelty. Whatever came next, Ryan would face it on his terms. The second meeting was set for a small coffee shop in Cambridge, a neutral space where Ryan felt less trapped. Ethan sat beside him, his presence a steady anchor as Paul walked in, looking even more haggard than before. The shop was busy, filled with the hum of conversation and the clink of cups, but to Ryan, it felt like the three of them were alone in a bubble of tension. Paul sat across from them, his hands wrapped around a cup of black coffee he hadn't touched. Thank you for coming, he said, his voice low. I didn't think you would. Ryan didn't respond right away. He studied his father, searching for the man who had once read him bedtime stories, who had carried him on his shoulders at county fairs. That man was gone, replaced by this broken figure whose eyes begged for mercy. Ethan's hand rested lightly on Ryan's arm, a silent reminder that he wasn't alone. I brought Ethan, Ryan said, his tone even. He's my partner. If we're going to talk, he's part of it. Paul's gaze flickered to Ethan, and for a moment, Ryan braced for the old disgust. But Paul only nodded, his expression unreadable. Fair enough, he said. I'm just glad you're here. Ethan spoke up, his voice calm but firm. Ryan's trying to figure out if you're worth helping. You need to give him a reason, not just a sob story. Paul flinched, but he didn't argue. I don't have much to offer, he said. I've been a drifter since I left. Odd jobs, cheap motels. I didn't face what I did to you, Ryan, until the cancer forced me to stop running. I know I can't undo it, but I want to try to make amends. Amends? Ryan's voice was sharp. You think money can fix what you did? You think sitting here, looking pathetic, erases the fact that I'll never walk again? Paul's face crumpled. No, I know it doesn't. But I'm asking for a chance to live, to maybe do something good with whatever time I've got left. Ethan leaned forward, his blue eyes narrowing. What does something good mean exactly? Because from where I'm sitting, you're asking Ryan to save your life without giving him anything but words. Paul hesitated, then pulled a small notebook from his pocket. I've been writing, he said, sliding it across the table. Letters. To you, Ryan. To your mom. To everyone I hurt. I never sent them because I didn't have the courage. But they're all I've got to show you I'm trying to face what I did. Ryan stared at the notebook, his heart pounding. He didn't reach for it. Why now, he asked. Why not 8 years ago, when I needed you to be a father? I was ashamed, Paul said, his voice barely audible. I couldn't face you after what I did. I ran because I couldn't live with myself. But the cancer, it's made me see I don't have time to keep running. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of years lost. Ryan felt Ethan's hand tighten on his arm, grounding him. He wanted to hate Paul, to let him suffer, but the notebook, those unsent letters, stirred something he couldn't name. Was it possible his father had changed, or was this just desperation dressed up as remorse? "I'll read it," Ryan said finally, his voice tight. "But that's all I'm promising." Paul nodded, relief flickering across his face. "That's more than I deserve." They left the coffee shop in silence, Ethan pushing Ryan's wheelchair through the drizzle. Back at the apartment, Ryan opened the notebook, his hands trembling. The pages were filled with Paul's scrawled handwriting. Letters dated over years, some tear-stained, others angry, all raw with guilt. One, addressed to Ryan, read, "I see you in every kid I pass on the street, and it kills me knowing I took your legs, your trust, your future. I don't know how to be a father anymore, but I'm trying to learn." Ryan closed the notebook, his chest tight. "He's not lying," he said to Ethan, who was watching him closely. "But I don't know if that's enough." Ethan knelt beside him, his voice soft. "You don't have to decide today, or tomorrow. You get to take as long as you need." Ryan nodded, but the weight of the decision pressed harder. He wasn't just choosing whether to save Paul's life. He was choosing who he wanted to be in the face of his past. Days turned into a week, and Ryan carried the notebook everywhere, reading and rereading Paul's words. Each letter was a window into a man unraveling, guilt, shame, and a desperate wish to undo the past. But words, Ryan knew, couldn't rebuild a spine or erase the nights he'd spent wondering why his father hated him enough to destroy him. Ethan noticed the toll it was taking. "You're not eating," he said one evening, setting a plate of pasta in front of Ryan. "You're barely sleeping. This is eating you alive, Ryan pushed the plate away, his appetite gone. "I keep thinking about what happens if I say no. He dies, and I have to live with that. But if I say yes, I'm giving him something he doesn't deserve." Ethan sat beside him, his hand resting on Ryan's knee. "You're not responsible for his life," he said. "He made his choices. You're allowed to make yours without carrying his weight." But Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that his choice would define him. He'd spent years proving he was more than his injury, more than his father's violence. Helping Paul now felt like betraying that strength, but letting him die felt like surrendering to the same hate that had broken him. He decided to dig deeper. Using his design skills, Ryan searched online for traces of Paul's life since the attack. He found arrest records, petty theft, public intoxication, nothing major but enough to paint a picture of a man spiraling. There were no signs of family, no friends stepping up to help. Paul hadn't lied. He was alone. The next meeting was at the hospital, where Paul was scheduled for a consultation. Ryan insisted on going, Ethan by his side. The sterile halls brought back memories of his own months in recovery, the endless beeping of machines, the pity in nurses' eyes. Paul was already there, hooked 2 and 4, looking smaller than ever. "The doctor says I've got a shot if I start treatment soon," Paul said, his voice weak. "But without the money, they won't even schedule it." Ryan studied him, searching for any sign of manipulation. "If I do this," he said, "it's not for you. It's for me. So I can look in the mirror and know I didn't let hate win." Paul's eyes widened, hope flickering. "You mean you'll help?" "I'm not promising anything," Ryan said. "I need to talk to the doctor, see what this really involves. And I need to know you're not just playing me." The doctor, a kind-eyed woman named Dr. Patel, confirmed the diagnosis and the cost. "Without treatment, he's got months," she said. "With it, he could have a year, maybe 2. But it's not a cure." Ryan nodded, his mind racing. He didn't have $50,000 lying around. His freelance work paid well, but not that well. He and Ethan had savings, but dipping into them meant risking their own stability. And yet, the alternative, doing nothing, felt like a stain he couldn't wash out. Back home, Ryan and Ethan talked late into the night. "If we do this, it's a sacrifice," Ethan said. "Our savings, our plans for the future, it's all on the line." "Are you sure?" "No," Ryan admitted. "But I keep thinking about Mom. She'd have helped him, even after everything. Not because he deserved it, but because she believed in doing what's right." Ethan sighed, his hand finding Ryan's. "Then we'll figure it out together. But only if you're sure." By the end of the week, Ryan made his choice. He would pay for the first round of Paul's treatment, but with conditions. Paul would need to prove he was serious about change, counseling, community service, something to show he wasn't just taking advantage. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was a step toward closure, a way to reclaim power over his past. The decision to help Paul wasn't a clean one. Ryan felt no warmth, no reconciliation, only a grim determination to do what he thought was right. He and Ethan pooled their savings, taking out a loan to cover the rest. The hospital scheduled Paul's treatment, and Ryan set his terms. Paul would attend weekly counseling and volunteer at a local LGBTQ+ youth center. If he slipped, the money stopped. Paul agreed, his gratitude tinged with shame. "I don't know how to thank you," he said during their next meeting at the hospital. "I don't deserve this." "You don't," Ryan said bluntly. "But this isn't about you. It's about me being able to live with myself." The first few weeks were tense. Paul started treatment, his health stabilizing, but Ryan kept his distance, communicating through emails and the occasional call. The counseling reports were encouraging. Paul was engaging, confronting his past, though progress was slow. At the youth center, he was quiet, awkward, but showed up, helping with small tasks like setting up chairs or sorting donations. Ryan, meanwhile, threw himself into his work, designing logos for a new client to offset the financial strain. Ethan took on extra shifts at the bookstore, their shared sacrifice a silent testament to their partnership. But the stress was palpable, fraying their usually easy dynamic. One night, after a long day, Ethan snapped. "I'm not saying you're wrong," Ethan said, his voice tight as they sat in the living room. "But this is killing us, Ree. We're stretched thin, and for what? So he can have a few more months?" Ryan's chest ached. He knew Ethan was right. Their savings were dwindling, their dreams of buying a house pushed further out of reach. "I know," he said, "but I can't stop now. If I do, it's like letting him win all over again." Ethan softened, his hand finding Ryan's. "I just don't want you to lose yourself trying to save him." The word stuck with Ryan. He started attending therapy himself, something he'd resisted since the accident. Talking about Paul, the attack, and the weight of his choice helped untangle the knots in his heart. He realized he wasn't just helping Paul. He was proving to himself that he could rise above the pain, that he was more than the boy left broken at 17. At the youth center, Ryan began volunteering too, wanting to see Paul's commitment for himself. He met kids like he'd been, scared, hiding, desperate for acceptance. One boy, Marcus, reminded Ryan of himself at 17, his eyes haunted but hopeful. Ryan shared his story, leaving out the details of Paul's return, and found it eased his own wounds to help others. One day, Paul approached him at the center, hesitant. "I saw you talking to Marcus," he said. "You're good with him. Better than I ever was with you." Ryan didn't respond, but the words lingered. He saw glimpses of change in Paul, small acts of kindness, moments of genuine remorse. It wasn't enough to erase the past, but it was something. Ryan began to see his decision not as saving Paul, but as saving himself from the bitterness that could have consumed him. Months passed, and Paul's health stabilized, though the cancer was still a shadow. He continued counseling and volunteering, slowly earning a place in the youth center's community. Ryan watched from a distance, never fully trusting but no longer consumed by hate. The act of helping Paul had shifted something in him, a release, not of forgiveness, but of the need to carry his father's sins. One evening, Ryan and Ethan hosted a small gathering at their apartment, a celebration of Ryan's latest design project. Friends filled the space with laughter, and for the first time in months, Ryan felt light. Paul wasn't invited, but his presence lingered in the quiet moments, a reminder of the choice Ryan had made. Later, as they cleaned up, Ethan pulled Ryan close, their foreheads touching. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You didn't let him break you again." Ryan smiled, his heart full. "I couldn't have done it without you." A week later, Paul asked to meet one last time. They sat on a bench by the Charles River, the water reflecting the October sky. Paul looked better, his face less gaunt, but his eyes carried a weight Ryan recognized, gratitude mixed with guilt. "I'm not going to live forever," Paul said, "but you gave me time to try to be better. I know it's not enough, but I'm grateful." Ryan nodded, his throat tight. "I didn't do it for you," he said. "I did it for me, so I could move on." Paul's eyes glistened, but he didn't argue. "You're a better man than I'll ever be." As Paul walked away, Ryan felt a quiet peace. He hadn't forgiven his father, and maybe he never would. But he had chosen compassion over hate, strength over vengeance. He wheeled back to the apartment, where Ethan was waiting, their love a beacon that had guided him through the darkness. In the years that followed, Ryan thrived, his career flourished, his bond with Ethan deepened, and he became a mentor to kids like Marcus, helping them find their own strength. Paul's time ran out, as the doctor had predicted, but Ryan didn't mourn the man who had hurt him. Instead, he celebrated the life he'd built, one defined not by his father's violence, but by his own resilience and love. The choice to help Paul hadn't erased the past, but it had freed Ryan to embrace his future, a future where he was whole, not because of his legs, but because of his heart.